October 15th, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio. The captured Japanese fighter screamed through 420 miles per hour, and Captain Jack Morrison felt his hands trembling on the stick. Not from fear, from something worse. Recognition. 3 months ago, he had been trying to shoot down planes exactly like this one over the Philippines, hunting them through tropical skies, watching his tracers arc toward enemy wings painted with rising suns. He had killed 3 of them. 3 Zero pilots who never made it home. But this was not a Zero. The Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate pulled harder than any Zero ever could, climbed faster, and right now at 20,000 feet with war emergency powers screaming through that big radial engine, it was flying faster than his beloved P-38 Lightning had ever managed. Faster than the plane that had kept him alive through 14 months of combat. Faster than American engineering. The thought made Jack's stomach twist. He pushed the throttle forward another fraction. The methanol injection system kicked in with a surge that pressed him back into the seat. The airspeed indicator climbed. 422, 425, 427 miles per hour. Jack keyed his radio, his voice tight. Right tower test bird able. Speed confirmed at 427. Static crackled. Then the tower controller's voice came back carefully neutral, but unable to hide a note of disbelief. Copy that, Able, 427. You're saying 427 miles per hour. Affirmative, 427 at Angels 20. Silence on the radio. Jack could picture the men in the tower looking at each other, checking their notes, doing the math, because the numbers sitting in their briefing folders translated from captured Japanese documents had seemed impossible. Propaganda, the kind of inflated performance claims every Air Force made about their fighters. Except it was true, every single digit. Jack eased the throttle back, felt the Hayate settle into a gentle descent. His heart was still racing, not from the flight itself. He had flown faster planes, done more dangerous things, shot at and been shot at in skies half a world away. But this was different. This was the first time he had touched the machine that represented everything he thought he had defeated, and discovered it was better than he had been told, better than intelligence had estimated, better in some ways than what American factories had given him to fight with. The landing was smooth. The Hayate's wide gear made it forgiving. Jack rolled to a stop near the hangar, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. Through the cockpit glass, he could see the ground crew approaching. Bill Hartley, the senior engineer from TAIC, was walking fast. Behind him, a dozen men in coveralls, some holding clipboards, others just staring at the fighter like it had dropped from another planet. Jack popped the canopy. Cool Ohio air washed over him, carrying the smell of engine oil and burned fuel. He pulled off his helmet, ran a hand through sweat-damp hair, and climbed out. Bill Hartley reached him first. The engineer was 41 gray, starting to show at his temples, and his eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Well, Bill's voice was level, but his knuckles were white around his clipboard. Jack looked at the Hayate, at its aggressive lines, the cowling still ticking as the engine cooled. The rising sun painted on the fuselage, half obscured now by American markings hastily applied over enemy insignia. It's fast, Jack said quietly, considerably faster than my P-38. Bill nodded slowly. The numbers match. Every digit, 427 at 20,000 feet, 92 octane plus methanol war emergency power. Jack paused. The Japanese weren't lying. No, Bill said, they weren't. The two men stood there, neither quite willing to say what they were both thinking, that they had won the war, won it decisively. Forced Japan to surrender after atomic fire consumed 2 cities and conventional bombing turned others to ash. But they had not won because American planes were universally superior. They had won because American factories produced more planes. American refineries produced better fuel. American supply lines delivered both to the front without interruption. Engineering excellence, it turned out, was not the same thing as industrial dominance. There's something else you need to see, Bill said. He turned and walked toward the hangar. Jack followed. Inside, under harsh electric lights, 3 more Japanese fighters waited. Jack recognized them from intelligence photos. The stubby, aggressive J-2M Raiden, the sleek Kai-61 Tony with its liquid-cooled inline engine, and farther back, partially disassembled, something he did not recognize at all. Bill stopped in front of a table covered with documents, translated reports, performance specifications, black and white photographs of aircraft in flight, some clearly taken by American reconnaissance, others captured from Japanese sources. He picked up a folder and handed it to Jack. We've been cataloging every fighter we can get our hands on. Anything the Japanese designed in the last 3 years of the war. Production aircraft, prototypes, even paper projects that never got built. Jack opened the folder. Inside were typed sheets listing aircraft by designation, manufacturer, and performance. His eyes scanned the numbers. Ki, 84 Hayate, 427 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. J2M3, Raiden 417 miles per hour at 16,600 feet. Ki 61-2, Tony Mung, 423 miles per hour at 28,000 feet. He kept reading. The numbers stayed high, higher than he had expected, higher than any American pilot he knew had expected. Then he reached the top two entries and stopped. Nakajima Ki 87, 439 miles per hour at 36,090 feet. Mitsubishi Ki 83, 438 miles per hour at 29,500 feet. Jack looked up. 439 miles per hour. Bill nodded. That's what the data says. At 36,000 feet, turbo supercharged, built specifically to intercept B-29s at altitude. Bill paused. 2 prototypes are completed. At least one flew. We have photographs. Jack stared at the number. 439 miles per hour. That was faster than anything America had fielded except the new P-80 jet, and the K-187 was piston-powered, propeller-driven, a machine from the same technological generation as his P-38 but faster, higher, more advanced. Why didn't we see them? Jack's voice was rough. Why didn't they use them against us? That, Bill said, is exactly what T.A. Ike wants to find out. He pulled another photograph from the stack. This one showed a man in civilian clothes, thin mid-20s, standing next to what looked like a partially constructed aircraft fuselage. The photo was grainy, clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. His name is Hiroshi Yamada. He's 29 years old, aerodynamics engineer, worked at the Nakajima factory in Ota from 1941 to 1945. Intelligence says he was on the team that designed the Ki-84, and he worked on the Ki-87 project in its final months. Jack studied the photograph. Yamada's face was serious focused. Even in the blurry image, Jack could see the intensity in his eyes, the way he looked at the aircraft components like they mattered more than anything else in the world. Jack knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror often enough. In the eyes of every pilot and engineer who loved machines more than was probably healthy. Where is he now? Jack asked. Detention camp outside Tokyo, Camp 7. He's being held with other technical personnel, not as prisoners of war exactly, more like persons of interest. Bill met Jack's eyes. TAIC wants you to interview him. The words hung in the air between them. Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. 3 months ago, he had been trying to kill Japanese pilots. Now someone wanted him to sit across a table from a Japanese engineer and have a conversation. Why me? His voice came out harder than he intended. Bill's expression did not change. Because you just flew their best production fighter. You know what these machines are capable of. And because Major Williams thinks you'll ask the right questions. I'm a pilot, not an interrogator. We have interrogators. What we need is someone who understands what these numbers mean. Bill tapped the folder. Someone who can tell the difference between propaganda and performance. Someone who flew combat missions and knows exactly what it takes to survive in the air. Jack looked at the photograph again. At Hiroshi Yamada standing beside his work. At the aircraft that might have killed American pilots if circumstances had been different, if fuel had been available, if time had not run out. What do you want me to find out? Everything, Bill said. Why the Ki-87 never deployed. Why the Ki-84 underperformed its test specifications in combat. What they were planning next. What they learned that we didn't. He paused. And most importantly, whether there are any more surprises waiting above us. Any more 400-mile-per-hour fighters we don't know about. Jack closed the folder. Outside, the October sun was setting. Through the hangar doors, he could see the Hayate sitting on the tarmac, its shadow long and dark. He thought about his wife Sarah, about the letter he had written her last week, carefully vague about his assignment, about Tommy, his wingman, who had gone down over the Philippines in January, shot down by a Japanese fighter he could not outrun, about the fact that he hated Japanese pilots, had hated them with perfect clarity for 14 months. But an engineer was not a pilot. An engineer made things. And Jack, before the war, had wanted to make things too, had studied mechanical engineering at Ohio State before Pearl Harbor turned him into a fighter pilot instead. "When do I leave for Tokyo?" he asked. "Friday. You'll fly military transport to Okinawa, then up to Japan proper. Major Williams will brief you tomorrow on interrogation protocols." Bill hesitated. "Jack, I know this is not what you signed up for." "None of us signed up for any of this," Jack said quietly. "We just did what we had to do." He looked at the folder in his hands, at the numbers that represented speed, performance, the limits of what propeller-driven aircraft could achieve before jets made them obsolete. 439 miles per hour, a number that haunted him all the way home. 3 days later, Jack Morrison stepped off a C-47 transport onto the tarmac at Atsugi Airfield, 25 miles southwest of Tokyo. The air smelled different. Smoke and salt and something else he could not quite name. Defeat, maybe? Or occupation. The scent of a nation on its knees. Around him, American soldiers moved with the casual confidence of victors. Jeeps rolled past, carrying officers. Somewhere in the distance, machinery rumbled. The sound of reconstruction or perhaps demolition. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. Major Williams met him at the operations building. The major was 52, career military, with the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped being surprised by anything. "Captain Morrison, good flight." "Long, sir." "They all are." Williams gestured to a waiting jeep. "We'll drive to the detention camp. It's about 40 minutes. I'll brief you on the way." They drove through countryside that still bore the scars of war. Burned out buildings, fields untended, people moving along the roads with their heads down, carrying what little they still owned. Jack watched it all through the Jeep's dusty windshield and felt nothing, or tried to feel nothing. Feeling complicated things about defeated enemies was not part of the job. Williams lit a cigarette, offered one to Jack. Jack declined. "Hiroshi Yamada," Williams said, pulling out a folder. "Graduated Imperial University, Tokyo in 1938. Top of his class in aeronautical engineering. Hired by Nakajima immediately. Worked on refinements to the Ki-43 Hayabusa for 2 years, then transferred to the Ki-84 project in 1942. Young for that kind of responsibility," Jack observed. "Talented, very talented. Japanese aviation industry was stretched thin by 42. They promoted promising engineers fast." Williams flipped a page. By all accounts, he was instrumental in the Ki-84's wing design, the high-speed airfoil that made it so fast. Jack thought about the way the Hayate had handled. The slight heaviness in the turns traded for that devastating, straight-line speed. "What's his attitude?" Jack asked. "Cooperative, hostile?" "Neither, polite, withdrawn. Answers direct questions but volunteers nothing." Williams exhaled smoke. "He's been in detention for 6 weeks. Interrogated twice by our people. Both times he confirmed basic facts about the Ki-84, but claimed not to have detailed documentation. Said it was destroyed before the surrender. Do we believe that? Intelligence thinks he's lying, thinks he hid documents somewhere, maybe buried them." Williams looked at Jack. "Your job is to find out, and if possible, get him to reveal the location." "How am I supposed to do that? I'm not trained in interrogation techniques." "You're not there to threaten him or trick him. You're there to talk to him, engineer to engineer." Williams crushed out his cigarette. "We think he'll respond to someone who understands what he built, someone who can appreciate it." The Jeep turned onto a narrow road lined with barbed wire. Ahead, Jack could see the detention camp. Low buildings behind chain-link fencing. Guard towers at the corners. American flags snapping in the wind. They stopped at the gate. An MP checked Williams' credentials, waved them through. Inside, the camp was orderly, clean. Nothing like the prisoner of war camps Jack had seen photographs of. These were not combat prisoners. They were technical specialists, engineers, scientists, aviation experts. People whose knowledge was more valuable than their confinement was punitive. Williams led Jack to a small building near the center of the camp. Inside, a plain room, table, 3 chairs, a single window with bars. "He'll be brought in shortly," Williams said. "We'll have a translator present. Sergeant Kim, good man, speaks fluent Japanese. How long do I have?" "As long as it takes, but if he's not talking after 2 hours, we'll end the session and try again tomorrow." Williams moved toward the door, then paused. "Captain, one more thing. Don't let him see that you're impressed by him or his work. Stay neutral, professional." "Understood, sir." Williams left. Jack sat down at the table and waited. 5 minutes later, the door opened. A young MP entered first, then stood aside. Behind him came a thin Japanese man in simple civilian clothes. Dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses, posture straight despite obvious fatigue. Hiroshi Yamada. Their eyes met, held. Jack saw intelligence there, wariness, and something else, a kind of resigned dignity. Behind Yamada came Sergeant Kim, the translator, Korean-American, early 30s, carrying a notebook. The MP positioned himself by the door. Yamada sat down across from Jack. Kim took the third chair slightly to the side. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Jack studied the man who had helped design the Hayate, looking for something. Hate, maybe. Or arrogance. Some reason to maintain the clean lines of enemy and ally, victor and defeated. But all he saw was exhaustion. And in Yamada's eyes, beneath the wariness, something that looked almost like curiosity. Jack spoke in English. Kim translated smoothly. "My name is Captain Jack Morrison, United States Army Air Forces. I'm an aeronautical engineer and test pilot assigned to the Technical Air Intelligence Command." Yamada listened to the translation, nodded once. Jack continued. "Last week I flew one of your Ki-84 Hayates." Yamada's head came up sharply. His eyes widened. He said something in rapid Japanese. Kim translated. "He asked what you thought of it." Jack made a decision. Williams had said stay neutral, but neutral was not going to build trust. And without trust, Yamada would tell him nothing. "It was faster than my P-38 Lightning," Jack said, met Yamada's eyes. "Considerably faster." The translator relayed this. Yamada stared at Jack for 3 heartbeats. Then he said something else. Kim translated, and there was surprise in his voice too. "He says you admit this." "I'm an engineer," Jack said. "Facts are facts. Your Hayate hit 427 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. My P-38 topped out at 414. Those are the numbers." Yamada sat back slightly. Some of the tension went out of his shoulders. He spoke again, longer this time. Kim translated. "He says the test specification called for 92-octane fuel plus methanol injection. He wants to know if that's what you used." "Yes, exactly those conditions." He asks if the engine ran smoothly. "The Homare was rough, vibration issues, but it held together." Yamada nodded, spoke again. "He says the Homare was always temperamental, powerful but unreliable. They tried to fix it but never had time." Kim paused. He asks, did the handling meet the specification? "Turns were heavy, high wing loading, but the roll rate was acceptable, and the climb performance was excellent." Jack leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Yamada, I need to ask you some questions about the Ki-84 and about other aircraft you worked on. Will you answer them?" The translator relayed this. Yamada was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. He says, "What do you want to know?" Jack pulled out a folded paper, the performance chart Bill Hartley had given him. He smoothed it on the table, turned it so Yamada could see. 10 Japanese fighters. 10 sets of numbers. Yamada's eyes moved down the list. His expression did not change, but Jack saw his hands tighten slightly on the edge of the table. "These numbers," Jack said, 439 miles per hour for the Ki-87, 438 for the Ki-83. "Are they accurate?" Yamada studied the document for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet Kim had to lean forward to hear. The translation came. "Yes, but only under perfect conditions." "Which you didn't have." "Which we did not have." Jack nodded slowly. "I need to understand something. You built these aircraft knowing you couldn't fuel them properly. knowing you didn't have the resources to produce them in meaningful numbers. Why? Yamada looked up, met Jack's eyes, and spoke for nearly a minute without stopping. Kim translated his voice, taking on some of the emotion from the original Japanese. He says we built what was possible. We tried to design excellence even when reality was failing, because that's what engineers do. We solve problems, even impossible problems, even when we know the solution will arrive too late. Kim paused. He says you want to understand Japanese aviation. Understand this. We did not lack skill. We lacked time, fuel, materials, factories that were not being bombed. We had brilliant designs and broken supply chains. We had engineers who could calculate airflow over wings and know aluminum to build those wings. Yamada kept speaking. His voice gained strength. He says the Ki 87 was perfect. The most beautiful thing he ever worked on. It flew once just before the surrender. Reached 438 miles per hour at 11,000 meters, and it was useless. They had no fuel to fly it again, no materials to build more, no time to deploy it. Kim's voice dropped. He says we built perfection in hell. Jack sat very still. He had not expected this raw honesty, this engineer's grief over work that would never matter. I'm sorry, Jack heard himself say. Yamada's head snapped up. He spoke sharply. He asked why you apologize. You were doing your calm. He was doing his. War is not fair to engineers, Jack said quietly. Is it? The translation made Yamada stop. His eyes searched Jack's face, looking for mockery perhaps, or pity, finding neither. He spoke again, more softly. He says no, war asks engineers to build miracles with scraps and then blames them when miracles do not come. They sat in silence. Jack thought about how to proceed. He needed information, documentation, the hidden files that intelligence believed existed, but pushing too hard would shut Yamada down. So he tried something else. We want to test them, Jack said, all of them. The Ki 87, the Ki 83, everything we can recover or reconstruct. Full documentation, proper test conditions. He paused. We want the truth of recorded, not propaganda, not estimates, the actual performance of what Japanese engineering achieved. Yamada listened. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes were intent. Why should I help you? The translated question was direct. Jack considered his answer carefully, then gave the only honest one he had. Because the knowledge shouldn't die. Because engineering excellence matters even in defeat. And because, he hesitated, because I think we both want the truth recorded correctly. Yamada was silent for a long time. A minute passed, then another. Finally he spoke, just a few words. Kim translated. He asked what you will do with this information. Document it, study it, learn from it. Jack met Yamada's eyes. Share it with engineers who come after us so they understand what was possible, what worked, what didn't. And my country's defeat will be part of the record, but so will the fact that Japanese engineers built some of the fastest piston fighters that ever flew. Jack paused. Both truths deserve to be remembered. Yamada looked down at the performance chart on the table, at the numbers that represented years of his life. Sweat and calculations and sleepless nights, dreams of aircraft that could turn the tide of a war that was already lost. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. He spoke, not to Kim, to Jack, in careful, halting English. I will help you. November 1945. Ota City, Japan, former Nakajima aircraft factory. The ruins stretched for half a mile in every direction. Twisted metal beams jutted from concrete foundations like broken bones. Craters from American bombs pocked the earth where assembly buildings had stood. The smell of ash still lingered 3 months after the last raid. Jack Morrison stood at the edge of what used to be the third manufacturing bay and watched Hiroshi Yamada pick his way through the rubble with the careful precision of a man navigating a graveyard. Behind them, 2 MPs with rifles stood guard. Sergeant Kim waited near a military truck smoking a cigarette. Bill Hartley crouched by a pile of twisted aluminum that might once have been part of a wing assembly, his engineer's mind cataloging even the destruction. Yamada stopped, looked around. His face was unreadable behind those wire-rimmed glasses, but his hands trembled slightly as he pointed to a section of collapsed wall. There, he said in English, then switched to Japanese, speaking to Kim. The translator called out. He says 2 meters east of that wall section. The floor is concrete. They buried the container 1 meter deep. Jack grabbed a shovel from the truck. Bill joined him. The MPs watched with the bored alertness of men who had seen stranger things than Americans digging through Japanese factory ruins on the word of a detained engineer. The work was hard. The concrete had cracked in the bombing, but not shattered. They had to clear rubble first. Broken bricks, shattered glass, pieces of machinery so mangled that their original purpose was lost. After 20 minutes, Jack's shoulders burned. Sweat soaked through his uniform shirt despite the November chill. He looked up to see Yamada standing motionless, watching them dig through the remains of his professional life. "You could help," Jack said. Kim translated. Yamada shook his head, responded. "He says he is still technically a detainee. He should not be seen laboring alongside American officers. It would complicate his status." Jack leaned on his shovel. "Your status is already complicated." Yamada's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. He said something else. "He says that is an accurate assessment." They kept digging. An hour and Bill's shovel struck metal. The sound rang out clear across the ruined factory floor. Both men stopped, dropped to their knees, used their hands to clear away the last of the dirt and debris. A cylinder, sealed with heavy-duty fasteners, maybe 3 feet long, 18 inches in diameter. Remarkably intact despite being buried under a bombed building. Jack looked at Yamada. The engineer had moved closer, his face tense. His hands were clenched at his sides. Bill worked the fasteners free. They were tight, corroded slightly, but American tools and American determination got them open. The lid came off with a hiss of trapped air. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents, blueprints, technical drawings, photographs, notebooks filled with handwritten calculations, all of it preserved, waiting to tell its story. Bill pulled out the first blueprint, unrolled it carefully. His eyes went wide. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. It was the Key 87, complete structural diagram, every measurement, every component, wing loading calculations in the margins, notes in Japanese about turbocharger integration challenges and solutions. Jack reached for a notebook, opened it to a random page. Even though he could not read Japanese, he recognized the universal language of engineering. Equations, diagrams, numbers that described airflow and thrust and the limits of what materials could endure. Yamada spoke quietly. Kim translated. He says that is his personal journal, from the Key 87 project, January to April 1945. A pause. "He says he wants it back when you are finished with it." Jack looked up. "You will get it back. All of it, I promise." They kept pulling documents from the cylinder. The archive was extensive. Performance data for the Key 84 under various conditions. Comparative analysis with captured American aircraft. Test flight reports complete with pilot observations and engineering responses to identified problems. And then Bill pulled out something that made even Yamada react. A photograph. Black and white, slightly blurred, showing 2 aircraft side by side on a tarmac. A Key 84 Hayate, and a P-51 Mustang with the Japanese markings. Jack took the photo, stared at it. "You captured a Mustang." Yamada nodded, spoke. "Philippines, December 1944. Emergency landing due to engine failure. Pilot survived. It became prisoner of war. The aircraft was recovered mostly intact." Kim paused, listening. "He says they ran comparison tests. Your P-51 was faster than the Ka-84 at low altitude by approximately 12 miles per hour. But above 20,000 feet, the Hayate had a slight advantage, 5 to 7 miles per hour." Jack turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written specifications in Japanese, performance numbers, strengths and weaknesses analyzed with clinical precision. "You studied our planes the same way we are studying yours," he said. "Of course." Yamada's English was heavily accented, but clear. "We were engineers, not fools." Bill laughed, short and sharp. "No, definitely not fools." They spent 2 more hours cataloging the archive. Everything went into crates for transport back to Wright Field. Everything would be translated, analyzed, incorporated into the growing database of Japanese aviation technology. But before they loaded the last crate, Yamada asked for one thing. Through Kim, he requested permission to read his own journal, just for a few minutes, to remember. Jack hesitated, then handed it over. Yamada opened the notebook. His fingers traced the pages. His lips moved silently, reading words he had written in another lifetime, when his country was still fighting, when he still believed the aircraft he designed might matter. When he looked up, there were tears on his face behind those glasses. He did not bother to hide them. He spoke in Japanese. His voice was rough. Kim translated. June 15th, 1944. First B-29 raid on Yawata. Our fighters could not reach them. We must build faster, higher, better. We must triumph. Yamada turned pages, found another entry. March 1945. Key 87 ready for testing. But Tokyo is burning. Are we building solutions for a war already lost? He closed the notebook, handed it back to Jack. Their eyes met. Jack understood then what he had not quite grasped before. Yamada had not just designed aircraft, he had poured his soul into them. His intelligence, his skill, his desperate hope that engineering excellence might somehow matter more than industrial capacity. And when it had not mattered, when the war had ground to its inevitable conclusion, despite everything he built, the grief was not political, it was personal. The grief of a craftsman who had made beautiful things that arrived too late to save anyone. Back at Wright Field 3 weeks later, Jack climbed into the cockpit of a fighter that had been designed to kill the bombers his countrymen flew. The Mitsubishi J2M3 Raiden sat on the tarmac like a coiled spring. Stubby fuselage, powerful radial engine, landing gear that seemed too delicate for the aggressive mass of the airframe. Bill Hartley stood on the wing checking Jack's harness. Raiden means thunderbolt, Bill said. Same name as our P-47, different philosophy entirely. How so? The P-47 was built to escort bombers, to fight its way to the target and back. The Raiden was built to do one thing: climb fast, hit hard, get out. Bill tapped the canopy frame. Pure interceptor, no compromises. Jack looked at the instruments, all labeled in Japanese. He had learned to read enough characters to identify the critical ones. Airspeed, altitude, engine temperature, fuel. Yamada was present, standing near the hangar with two other detained Japanese engineers who had worked on the J2M program at Mitsubishi. They had been brought to Wright Field as consultants, a strange new world where former enemies compared notes on thrust-to-weight ratios. The engine start procedure was complex. Jack followed the checklist Bill had prepared. The Mitsubishi Kasei radio coughed, caught, roared to life with a sound that was different from American radials. Rougher, more aggressive. The whole aircraft vibrated. Jack felt it through the stick, through the rudder pedals, through the seat. This was not a refined machine. This was a weapon that had traded elegance for effectiveness. Tower cleared him for takeoff. Jack advanced the throttle. The Raiden accelerated hard, wanted to weather vane right, required constant left rudder pressure. At 85 miles per hour, it leaped into the air almost violently, and then it climbed. Jack had flown P-38s, P-47s. Even got a few hours in a P-80 jet, but the Raiden climbed like something possessed. The vertical speed indicator showed 2,500 feet per minute. The nose pointed at the sky and the engine pulled without complaint. 5,000 feet, 7,000, 10,000. The air thinned, the engine kept pulling. 15,000 feet in under 6 minutes. Jack leveled at 16,600 feet. The altitude where TAIC Dadada said the Raiden achieved maximum speed. He advanced throttle to war emergency power, engaged the methanol injection system Mitsubishi had installed for high-performance intercepts. The engine note changed, deepened. Jack felt the surge of power press him back. The airspeed climbed, 390, 400, 410. He pushed harder. The Raiden responded, 414, 415, 416 miles per hour. Jack eased back. Let the fighter settle into level flight. His hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was reeling. The estimate had been 417 miles per hour at 16,600 feet. He had just hit force 16. The Japanese numbers were accurate. Again. He put the Raiden through maneuvers. Turns were heavy. The high wing loading that gave it speed made it sluggish in the horizontal. Roll rate was mediocre. This was not a dogfighter, not a machine for tangling with Hellcats in turning contests. But vertical performance was exceptional. Jack pulled into a zoom climb. The Raiden shot upward like it was trying to escape gravity itself. In a real fight, this thing would climb above the combat, pick its target, dive, fire, climb away again. Hunter philosophy, not warrior. He brought it down carefully. Landing required attention. The Raiden was nose-heavy, wanted to drop its nose hard on approach. But Jack had learned to feel the edge of a stall, and he greased it onto the runway despite the unfamiliar handling. Yamada was waiting when Jack climbed out. "Your Raiden is an assassin," Jack said. Yamada smiled, actually smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "That was Mitsubishi's intention," he said in careful English. "Zero was samurai sword. Raiden is rifle." Jack understood. Different tools for different purposes. The Zero's legendary maneuverability made sense when the enemy was other fighters. But when the enemy was four-engine bombers at 25,000 feet, you needed speed and climb, not turning radius. They walked toward the hangar. Bill joined them carrying a clipboard thick with notes. "The production aircraft are impressive," Bill said, "but they are not the fastest. What about the prototypes, the Ki 87, the Ki 83? Yamada stopped walking, looked at Bill, then at Jack. "Ki 87 components exist," he said slowly. "We could reconstruct." Bill's eyebrows went up. "Reconstruct, build one?" "Not build, assemble from what remains." Yamada's English was improving with practice, or perhaps with trust. First prototype mostly complete, hidden before surrender. Second prototype parts scattered, but possible to make one flight-worthy aircraft. Jack felt something shift in his chest. The Ki 87, 439 miles per hour at 36,000 feet. The fastest of them all. The one that had flown once and then disappeared into the chaos of surrender. A chance to verify the number that haunted him. To know for certain if it was real or just engineering optimism recorded in the final desperate months of a lost war. "Is that even worth it?" Bill asked. "The war is over. Why spend resources testing a prototype that never fought?" Jack turned to him. "Because we need to know what was possible. We need to know the absolute limits of what piston engine fighters could achieve." He paused. "And because if we ever face an enemy with Japanese engineering skills and better resources, we need to understand what they might build." Bill considered this, nodded slowly. "I will need to get authorization from Major Williams, maybe higher." He looked at Yamada. How long would reconstruction take, Yamada thought? With proper tools and assistance, 3 months. Perhaps 4. That is a long time. It is a complex aircraft. Turbocharger integration alone requires precision. Yamada met Bill's eyes. "But it can be done, if you authorize it." Bill left to make phone calls. Jack and Yamada stood in the hangar doorway watching the sun set over the Ohio airfield. The Raiden sat behind them cooling. The smell of burned fuel and hot metal hung in the air. "Why are you helping us?" Jack asked quietly. Yamada was silent for a long moment. "Because you kept your word," he finally said. "You documented the truth. Not propaganda. Not lies about Japanese inferiority. The truth." He paused. "And because I think the right side won." Jack looked at him sharply. "You believe that I fought for Japan. I built aircraft to kill Americans." Yamada's voice was level. "But I was lied to. We were told Americans were barbarians, told you had no honor, no skill." He met Jack's eyes. "You are not barbarians. You are engineers, like me." The war was still real. The killing was real. Yes, and my side was wrong to start it. Yamada took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt. "But the aircraft were right. The engineering was good. And I want that remembered correctly." Jack thought about his own journey, from hating every Japanese soldier and pilot with white-hot intensity, to sitting in their cockpits, to working alongside their engineers, to discovering that excellence and evil were not mutually exclusive And neither were defeat and dignity. "We will remember it correctly," Jack said. "I promise you that." 3 days later, authorization came through. Reconstruct the Key 87, test it properly, document everything. The project would take place at the Nakajima factory in OTE, partially reopened under American supervision. Yamada would lead a team of 6 Japanese engineers. American mechanics would assist. Bill Hartley would oversee, and Jack Morrison would fly it when it was ready. January 1946. The reconstruction began. The factory floor that had once produced fighters for the Imperial Japanese Navy now hosted in strange collaboration. American soldiers worked alongside Japanese civilians. Language barriers dissolved into the universal vocabulary of torque specifications and tolerance measurements. Yamada had been right about the timeline. The work was complex. Components from 2 different prototype airframes had to be carefully inspected, matched, assembled. The turbocharger system required complete rebuilding. Fuel lines needed replacement. The electrical system had to be rewired to account for degraded insulation. Jack visited the site weekly, watched the Key 87 take shape. Each visit showed more progress. The fuselage mated to the wings. The engine mounted and aligned. The turbocharger nacelles fitted with painstaking precision. In each visit, he saw something else. The American mechanics and Japanese engineers were not just working together. They were becoming a team, trading techniques, arguing over the best way to solve problems, drinking coffee together during breaks. Coffee, it turned out, was a universal language, even more effective than mathematics. One afternoon in early February, Jack found Yamada alone in the factory after hours. The engineer was standing in front of the nearly complete Key 87, just looking at it. His expression was complicated. Pride and sadness mixed together. Jack approached quietly. Yamada did not turn. "Beautiful, is it not?" Yamada said in English. "Yes," Jack agreed. "Very beautiful. I worked on this aircraft for 3 months, January to April 1945. Yamada's voice was distant. "Every day Tokyo burned a little more. Every day the war drew closer to being lost. And every day I came here and tried to build something perfect." "Did you succeed?" "Technically, yes. The Key 87 represents the highest achievement of Japanese piston engine fighter design." Yamada turned to face Jack. "Practically, it was irrelevant. By the time we tested it, we had no fuel to fly it more than once. No materials to build more. No time to deploy it." Jack stepped closer to the aircraft, ran his hand along the fuselage. The metal was cold under his palm. "It still matters," he said. "Not for the war, but for what comes after. The knowledge, the proof of what was possible." Yamada nodded slowly. "That is what I tell myself. Late at night when I wonder if all this work was vanity. If I should have spent those months doing something useful instead of building an irrelevant masterpiece." It was not vanity, it was documentation. Jack looked at Yamada. "Future engineers will study this aircraft. They will learn from your solutions, your innovations. That matters." "To whom?" "To everyone who builds the next generation of fighters, the next generation of interceptors." Jack paused. "To the pilots whose lives might be saved because someone remembered what you figured out about high-altitude performance." They stood together in the quiet factory. Outside, the last light was fading from the winter sky. Inside, the Key 87 waited, almost ready, almost complete. A week later, something happened that changed the equation. A Japanese engineer approached Bill Hartley, quietly, nervously, said that a man claiming to be a Soviet intelligence officer had tried to recruit him, offered money, safe passage to the USSR, a position in a Soviet aviation laboratory. The engineer had refused, reported it immediately. But the message was clear. The Americans were not the only ones interested in Japanese aviation technology. The Cold War had not officially started, but in the ruins of defeated Japan, the race for knowledge was already underway. And the Ki-87, with its advanced turbocharger system and high-altitude capability, was exactly the kind of technology the Soviets needed for intercepting American B-29s if the alliance ever collapsed. Bill increased security. MPS now patrolled the factory day and night. Engineers were escorted to and from the facility. No one worked alone. Jack asked Yamada if the Soviets had approached him. They were sitting in the factory office drinking bitter instant coffee that somehow tasted better when shared. Yamada nodded. 2 weeks ago, a man who claimed to be a trade representative. He knew too much about the Key 87, too much about my work. What did he offer you? Laboratory in Moscow, resources, freedom to continue research. Yamada took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes. I refused. Why so? Because you kept your word, you documented the truth, not propaganda. Yamada put his glasses back on. And because I think your side represents something closer to what I believe engineering should be. Open, shared, not secret and controlled. Jack felt something unexpected. Gratitude, and a strange kind of friendship that should not exist between men who had been enemies 6 months ago. Thank you, he said quietly. Yamada shrugged. I am not a political man, Captain Morrison. I am an engineer. I want my work to matter. And I think it will matter more in American hands than Soviet ones. By mid-March, the Ki-87 was complete. The engine had been test run on the ground. Systems checked and rechecked. Yamada pronounced it flight-worthy. A test date was set, March 20th. Jack would fly it. Yamada would observe. And they would finally answer the question that had driven this entire project. Was the number real 439 miles per hour at 36,000 feet? Could a Japanese piston fighter really achieve what the documents claimed? In 3 days, they would know. March 20th, 1946. Wright Field, Ohio. Dawn. Jack Morrison stood in front of the reconstructed Ki-87 and felt his hands trembling. Not from cold, though the March morning was bitter. Not from fear, though he was about to fly an aircraft that had killed its original test pilot's career when Japan surrendered before deployment. From the weight of what this moment represented. 6 months ago, he had been shooting at Japanese aircraft. Now he was about to climb into the most advanced fighter they had ever built, an aircraft that existed in only one flyable example in the entire world. Assembled from prototype pieces by the same engineers who had designed it, working alongside American mechanics who 6 months ago would have been ordered to destroy it. The Ki-87 gleamed under the hangar lights. Larger than the other Japanese fighters Jack had flown, more aggressive in its lines. The turbocharger nacelles on either side of the fuselage gave it a distinctive silhouette. Power and purpose made visible in aluminum and engineering precision. Yamada approached. He moved slowly, deliberately. Behind his glasses, his eyes were red-rimmed. Jack suspected the engineer had not slept. She is ready, Yamada said. His English had improved dramatically over 4 months of daily interaction with American personnel. All systems tested, engine runs perfectly, turbocharger calibrated. You are certain, Per? Yamada met his eyes. Captain Morrison, I have rebuilt this aircraft 3 times in my dreams since the war ended. Once in Ramutadi. Yes, I am certain. Bill Hartley joined them, clipboard in hand. The senior engineer's face was drawn. This was the culmination of months of work, thousands of man-hours, a small fortune in resources allocated to testing an aircraft from a defeated enemy. If the Ki-87 failed, if it crashed, if the numbers proved false, the whole program would be questioned, and the fragile collaboration between former enemies would fracture. Test parameters are the same as the original 1945 flight, Bill said. Climbed to 36,000 feet, level flight, war emergency power plus full turbocharger boost, maximum speed run. Fuel, 92 octane plus methanol, same specification as Japanese test conditions. Bill paused. Jack, if anything feels wrong, abort. This aircraft is irreplaceable. You are more irreplaceable. Jack nodded, looked past Bill to where a crowd had gathered. TAIC officers, right field personnel, photographers with cameras, even a few reporters, though their stories would remain classified for years. And standing slightly apart, the team of Japanese engineers who had built this machine. 6 men in American-issued work clothes, their faces tense, with an emotion Jack now understood. This was their legacy being tested. Their professional lives distilled into one aircraft and one number. 439 miles per hour. Yamada walked with Jack to the Ki-87, helped him with the pre-flight inspection. They moved around the aircraft together, checking every surface, every fastener, every system. Engineer and pilot, American and Japanese. The divisions that had mattered so much 6 months ago feeling increasingly arbitrary. At the cockpit, Yamada stopped, placed his hand on the fuselage. "This aircraft represents the best work I will ever do," he said quietly. "I was 28 years old. My country was dying, and I built something perfect." Jack understood. Yamada was not asking for anything, just stating a fact. A man's relationship with the best work of his life. "It will fly again," Jack said, "and we will record the truth." Yamada nodded, stepped back. Jack climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit. The seat had been modified slightly to accommodate American pilot dimensions, but the instruments were original. Japanese characters labeling altitude, airspeed, engine, temperature, fuel pressure. He had learned to read them, had spent hours memorizing which gauge measured what, had flown this cockpit in his mind 100 times before this moment. Bill appeared on the wing, helped Jack with his harness, checked the radio connection, made sure the oxygen system was functioning. "Remember," Bill said, "this is not combat. This is documentation. Fly smart. Fly safe." "Understood." Bill climbed down. The ground crew pulled the ladder away. Jack was alone with the machine. He ran through the startup checklist. Fuel selector to main. Mixture rich. Throttle cracked. Magnetos on. His hand moved to the starter. He hesitated for just a moment. Thought about Tommy, his wingman killed by a Japanese fighter over the Philippines. Thought about Yamada, who had designed aircraft intended to kill American pilots. Thought about how war made men into enemies and peace made them into colleagues. Then he engaged the starter. The Mitsubishi Ha-43 engine coughed, caught, roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. The whole aircraft vibrated. Jack felt it through every control surface, through the seat, through his bones. This was power. This was what Japanese engineering could achieve when given the resources and time to build something without compromise. Tower cleared him for takeoff. Jack advanced the throttle. The Ki-87 rolled forward. Heavy, purposeful. At 95 miles per hour, it lifted with surprising grace for such a large fighter. Gear retraction was smooth. Systems all green. Jack banked gently, climbing through 5,000 feet. The engine pulled strongly. No roughness, no hesitation. Whatever temperamental qualities had plagued earlier Japanese radial engines, the Ha-43 had solved them. Or perhaps Yamada and his team had simply built this particular example with extraordinary care. 10,000 feet. The altimeter unwound steadily. Outside the cockpit, Ohio spread below. Fields and towns, roads and rivers. A country at peace. Prosperous and unbombed. 15,000 feet. Jack activated the turbocharger system at 20,000 feet. The procedure was complex, required manual engagement and careful monitoring of boost pressure. But Yamada had walked him through it a dozen times. The engine note changed, deepened. The turbocharger spooled up with a rising whine, and the engine kept pulling, even as the air thinned, even as altitude increased and normally aspirated engines would begin to gasp. The turbocharger compressed the thin air, fed it to the engine, maintained sea-level pressure at altitude. This was the Ki-87's secret. This was how it achieved performance at heights where other fighters struggled. 25,000 feet, 30,000. Jack's oxygen system worked perfectly. He breathed carefully, watched the instruments. Everything normal, everything functioning as designed. 35,000 feet. He leveled at exactly 36,090 feet, the altitude specified in the test parameters. The height at which Yamada's calculations said the Ki-87 would achieve maximum speed. Below him, the world was a curved horizon. Above, the sky shaded into darkness. At this altitude, you could see the edge of space, the place where atmosphere surrendered to void. Jack checked his position. Clear airspace. No other traffic. Nothing but him and this Japanese fighter, and the question that had driven months of work. He advanced the throttle to war emergency power, engaged the methanol injection system, pushed the turbocharger to maximum boost. The Ki-87 responded like it had been waiting for this moment. The acceleration was smooth, powerful. The airspeed indicator climbed steadily, 380 miles per hour, 400, 420. The aircraft was stable, no vibration, no flutter, just clean, purposeful speed, 430. Jack's breathing quickened. His hands were steady on the controls, but his heart hammered. This was it. This was the number, 439 miles per hour, the peak of what Japanese engineering had achieved. The fastest of them all, 435, 437. The needle touched 438 miles per hour and held. Jack maintained altitude, power settings, everything exactly as specified. The Kish-87 flew straight and level at 36,000 feet eating distance at a rate that matched the best of what America had fielded, 438 miles per hour. He keyed the radio. His voice was tight with emotion he had not expected. Right tower test bird Zebra. Speed recorded at 438 at Angels 36. Static. Then Bill Hartley's voice, and it was shaking. Copy that, Zebra. 438 miles per hour at 36,000 feet. Can you confirm that number? Confirmed, 438. Jack paused. The estimate was 439. We are 1 mile per hour below calculated maximum. More silence. Then Bill again. 1 mile per hour variance on a reconstructed prototype tested 6 months after original flight is within any reasonable margin of error. Jack, the number is real. The Japanese calculations were accurate. Jack sat at 36,000 feet in an enemy fighter that should not exist. That had been built in the dying months of a lost war. That represented the absolute peak of piston engine fighter performance. And he understood something profound. The war had not been won because American planes were universally better. It had been won because American industry could produce more planes. American refineries could provide better fuel. American supply lines could sustain operations across an ocean. Japanese engineers were brilliant. Their designs were innovative. Their calculations were precise. They had simply run out of time, resources, and fuel before excellence could matter. Jack eased the throttle back. Let the Ki-87 settle into a gentle descent. At 20,000 feet, he ran handling tests, turns, climbs, rolls, evaluating the aircraft's capabilities across his performance envelope. It was good, very good. Not as maneuverable as a Zero, not as forgiving as a P-51, but fast, stable at altitude, powerful, a hunter, built for one job, to climb into the stratosphere and kill the B-29s that were burning Japan's cities, a job it had arrived too late to do. Jack brought the Ki-87 down through 10,000 feet, 5,000, configured it for landing, gear down, flaps extended. The approach was stable. The aircraft wanted to fly, wanted to stay in the air where it belonged. At 110 miles per hour, Jack crossed the runway threshold, eased back on the stick. The Ki-87 settled onto the concrete with a gentleness that surprised him. Rollout was smooth. He taxied back to the hangar where the crowd had swelled. Everyone had heard the radio transmission. Everyone knew what the numbers meant. When Jack cut the engine, the silence that followed felt profound. He sat in the cockpit for a moment, hands still on the controls, breathing hard, not from physical exertion, from the emotional weight of what had just happened. Then he opened the canopy, stood, looked down at the faces staring up at him. Yamada stood at the front. Tears streamed down his face. He made no attempt to hide them. Jack climbed down. His legs felt weak. The ground seemed strange after an hour at altitude. Yamada approached. And then in full view of American officers and Japanese engineers and everyone watching, he bowed, deep and formal, the kind of bow that conveyed profound respect. Jack did not know the proper response, so he bowed back, as deeply as he could manage, showing Yamada the same respect the engineer had shown him. When they straightened, Yamada extended his hand. Jack took it. They shook. Former enemies, engineers first, men who understood what it meant to build something excellent and have it arrive too late to matter. Thank you, Yamada said in English. His voice was rough. Thank you for giving her wings one more time. Thank you for showing us what was possible, Jack replied. Bill Hartley stepped forward. His clipboard was covered in notes. His face showed something Jack had rarely seen, genuine awe. Official recorded speed, Bill said, 438 miles per hour at 36,090 feet. Fastest confirmed speed of any Japanese piston fighter ever tested. The crowd erupted, applause, cheers. American personnel celebrating alongside Japanese engineers who 6 months ago had been enemy nationals. Jack looked around at all of them, at this strange new world where former enemies worked together to document the truth, where engineering excellence mattered more than national origin, where the goal was not victory, but understanding. Later that afternoon, and after the celebration had died down and the reports had been filed, Jack sat with Yamada in the hangar office. They drank terrible instant coffee that somehow tasted better when shared between friends. "What happens now?" Yamada asked. Jack considered the question. "We document everything, create a complete record of Japanese fighter performance. All 10 aircraft, all the data, all the lessons learned. And then we make sure future engineers can study it, learn from it, understand what you achieved." Yamada nodded slowly. "And my work will not be forgotten." "No, it will not be forgotten." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, mechanics were already preparing for the next phase of testing. More captured Japanese aircraft waited, more numbers to verify, more truths to document. "I have something for you," Yamada said. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, handed it to Jack. Inside was a letter, handwritten in Japanese, with an English translation clipped to it. Jack read the English version. The letter was dated March 1945, written by Yamada during the final months of the key 87 project. It described his thoughts, his fears, his determination to build something excellent even as his world collapsed. One passage stood out. "Tokyo is burning. My work is likely futile, but I build anyway. Not for victory, for excellence. So that someday someone will see these machines and know that Japan's engineers tried. We reached for the sky, even as our ground crumbled. We failed to save our nation, but we succeeded in proving what was possible. And perhaps that matters more than winning or losing. Perhaps that is what survives when the shooting stops." Jack looked up. His throat was tight. "This is why we fought to document everything," he said. "Because numbers tell what you built, but words tell why you built it. And both truths deserve to be remembered." Yamada nodded. "I want that letter included in the final report, so people understand. We were not monsters. We were engineers, doing our best with impossible circumstances. It will be included, I promise." Over the next 3 months, Jack flew 8 more Japanese fighters. Each one taught a different lesson. Each one changed his understanding of what the enemy had been capable of. The Key 83 twin-engine heavy fighter, fast but too complex for wartime production. The Key 61 Tony with its elegant inline engine, superb design undermined by manufacturing problems. The N1K2 Shidenkai, the only late war Japanese fighter that could turn with American planes and still bring speed. Each aircraft was documented, photographed, tested thoroughly. The data compiled into reports that would remain classified for years, but would eventually become the definitive source for understanding Japanese aviation technology. And through it all, Yamada was there, consulting, explaining, helping American engineers understand the decisions Japanese designers had made. The collaboration deepened. What had begun as interrogation became partnership. American technical skill combined with Japanese design innovation created insights that neither side could have achieved alone. By June 1946, the testing program was complete. 10 Japanese fighters fully documented, performance data verified, technical reports written. Major Williams called Jack into his office at Wright Field. "Captain Morrison, you have done extraordinary work. The intelligence gathered from this program will influence American fighter design for the next decade." "Thank you, sir." Williams pulled out a folder. "There is one more thing. The Japanese consultants, their detention status is being reviewed. Some will be returned to Japan. Some will be offered positions with American aerospace companies, civilian roles, research positions." Jack understood. "Yamada, we would like to keep him. His expertise in high-altitude aerodynamics is exceptional, and he has proven himself trustworthy." Williams paused. "Would you support that recommendation?" Jack thought about the last 6 months, about flying enemy aircraft, about learning to see past nationality to engineering excellence, about discovering that the man who designed planes to kill Americans was just a man who loved flight. Yes, sir, I support it completely. Yamada accepted the position. He would work for American aviation companies for the next 3 years, contributing to the development of high-altitude interceptors, sharing knowledge that had cost him everything to gain. In 1949, he returned to Japan, not as a defeated enemy, as a consultant who had helped bridge the gap between former adversaries. He would spend the rest of his career designing civilian aircraft, passenger jets, machines that carried people instead of bombs, connections instead of conflict. And every aircraft he touched was excellent. 15 years later, Paris, International Aeronautics Conference, 1961. Jack Morrison sat in the hotel bar and watched the door. He was 48 now, retired from active flying, but still consulted for aerospace companies. His hair was gray at the temples. His hands showed the scars of a lifetime working with machines. The door opened. A man entered, mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, moving with the careful precision Jack remembered from a factory floor in Ohio 16 years ago. Hiroshi Yamada. Their eyes met. Recognition sparked. Then joy. They stood, embraced. Former enemies, old friends, men who had shared something profound in the aftermath of terrible war. Jack Morrison, Yamada said. Tomo. His English was nearly flawless now. Decades of practice had smoothed the rough edges. You look well? You too, Hiroshi. How is the civilian aviation business? Profitable. I am designing passenger jets now. 600 seats, trans-Pacific range. Yamada smiled. Still chasing numbers. They ordered drinks, sat at a quiet table away from the conference crowds. I flew an F-100 last month, Jack said. Hit Mach 1.3. I saw one at the air show, beautiful machine. Yamada paused. Do you remember when 439 miles per hour seemed impossible? Now it is a slow Sunday drive. They laughed, shared the comfortable silence of men who had been through fire together and emerged changed. Does it matter? Yamada asked quietly. The Key 87? All that work, Jack considered. It mattered that it was recorded. Every engineer who designs high-altitude interceptors reads those reports. Your work taught the next generation. Even though we lost, especially because you lost, it proved that engineering excellence survives political defeat. Jack paused. And it proved something else. That knowledge is more valuable than victory. That understanding matters more than winning. Yamada nodded slowly. I have a daughter now, 16 years old, smart, wants to be an engineer like her father. What do you tell her about the war? I tell her that I built beautiful things that arrived too late to save anyone, but I built them anyway, because engineering is about possibility, not politics. Yamada looked at Jack. And I tell her that the American pilot who tested my aircraft became one of my dearest friends, that enemies can become colleagues, that knowledge transcends nationality. Jack felt something in his chest tighten. I hated you once, hated all of you, after Tommy died. And now I am glad we tested those aircraft, documented them, because the truth is complicated. We won, but not because we were smarter, because we had more. More factories, more fuel, more time. Yes, and that is the truth that deserves to be remembered. Both sides of it. They talked late into the night about aircraft, about the space race, about the jet age and where aviation was heading, about their children and their hopes for a world that had learned something from the last war's mistakes. When they finally parted promising to stay in touch, Jack walked back to his hotel through Paris streets and thought about legacy. The Ki-87 sat in a museum now, partially disassembled, preserved. A placard beside it listed the specifications, 438 miles per hour at 36,000 feet, and in smaller print, a note about test conditions, about fuel quality, about the gap between laboratory performance and combat reality. The complete story, not just victory, not just defeat, the complicated truth that honored everyone involved. Jack thought that was worth more than any propaganda, worth more than simplified narratives of good and evil. The truth, documented, preserved, passed to the next generation of engineers who would build faster, higher, better, standing on the shoulders of giants, even when those giants had been enemies. Present day, Washington, D.C. National Air and Space Museum. The old man moved slowly through the exhibit hall, 107 years old, white-haired, using a cane. But his eyes were still sharp behind glasses. Jack Morrison stopped in front of the Nakajima Key 84 Hayate. Restored, beautiful, proud. The placard read maximum speed 427 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Test conditions 92 octane fuel plus methanol injection. And below frontline performance, often significantly lower due to fuel shortages. The complete truth. A young man approached, maybe 30, wearing an aerospace company badge. He looked at the old man, then at the aircraft. "Excuse me, sir? Did you serve in World War II?" Jack smiled. "I did." "Did you ever encounter these Japanese fighters?" "I flew them. After the war, test pilot for the intelligence command, we documented their performance." The young man's eyes widened. "You flew this actual aircraft?" "I flew one like it, and 9 others, including the Ki 87, the fastest of them all." "What was it like flying enemy aircraft?" Jack looked at the Hayate, remembered the first time he had pushed it past 400 miles per hour. The shock, the recognition that excellence had no nationality. "It was humbling," he said quietly. "I learned that we did not win because we were smarter. We won because America's factories, refineries, and supply lines kept us flying while theirs starved. That does not diminish our victory, it explains it honestly." The young man nodded, processing this. "The engineer who designed this," Jack continued, "Hiroshi Yamada, he became one of my closest friends, taught me more about aviation than any textbook, showed me that knowledge matters more than nationality." "Is he still alive?" "He passed away in 2015, 99 years old, brilliant until the end." Jack smiled. "But his work survives. In museums like this, in engineering schools, in every high-altitude interceptor that learned from what he figured out." The young man was silent. Then, "Thank you for your service, bro, and for documenting the truth." Jack nodded, turned back to the Hayate. He stood there for a long time, remembering. Not just the war, not just the victories and the losses, but the aftermath. The strange friendship forged in hangar offices over bad coffee. The discovery that enemies could become colleagues. That defeat and dignity were not mutually exclusive. He thought about Yamada's letter, the one that had been included in the final TAIC report. The words that explained why excellence mattered even in futility. "We reached for the sky even as our ground crumbled." That was the legacy. Not victory, not defeat, the reaching, the striving, the refusal to surrender excellence even when everything else was lost. 10 fighters, numbers from 369 to 439 miles per hour. Each one a story of human ambition meeting harsh reality. Each one now preserved, not as trophies, as lessons. Because the best memorial to any war is not celebrating victory. It is ensuring the truth survives. All of it, even the parts that make victory complicated. Jack Morrison touched the fuselage of the Hayat one last time, felt the cold metal under his palm, remembered the day he first flew it, the day his understanding of enemies and allies began to shift. Then he turned and walked slowly toward the exit, an old man who had flown faster than most men ever would, who had learned that speed was just a number, and that understanding was worth more than winning. Behind him, the Japanese fighters waited in their museum silence, forever frozen at their maximum performance, forever teaching their lessons to anyone willing to learn. 439 miles per hour, the fastest enemy, the lasting legacy, the complicated truth.